Hello crafty friends, it's Jess from jesscrafts.com, and today I have a card share as part of my Halloween series featuring the newest release from Nook Design. Their September release has a couple of different Halloween sets in it. This set is called Spooky Street and features a lot of silhouette images. It's something a little bit different from Nook, but I think it's done really well. And I'm going to try to create a scene card that incorporates a lot of the different stamps from the set. The two big focal images in this set are a large haunted house and a tree. And at first I was actually a little bit thrown off by them because the tree is kind of large in comparison to the house. But as I played around with them, I realized that if you kind of create it so that the house is in the background and the tree is in the foreground, it makes sense for the tree to be larger. And so I'm going to be kind of using that as I create. And I also like the idea that the elements kind of mix and match. I don't think that they have to be used together. You don't have to use the tree to use the haunted house, and so it's okay if not everything's exactly in scale and proportion, because all of the different elements have their cute aspects. And so I'm just going to take the actual stamps themselves and kind of play with them on the card base. The card panel. And I'm thinking about what do I really want this card to look like. And I think that a great way to lay that out is to stamp on scrap paper, but an actually even easier way to do it with clear stamps is to just lay the stamps right on. I think that would probably be a little more tricky with rubber stamps as the blocks would get in the way. So I'm just kind of placing things on, seeing how they fit and work in there. I really like this set. I think it has some really fun elements in it. I think those spooky eyes are really cool, but I'm set on using the haunted house for sure. And so I don't think the spooky eyes will work out as well, but I want to definitely do another card with those eyes. I was thinking like if they were yellow embossed, it would create a fun card. And so I'm just playing around with the different sentiments as I kind of lay out the scene. Like I said, the house kind of got to be in the background and the tree in the foreground, so I'm making sure they're not even on the panel. And then I find out that the happy haunt sentiment fits in there really well. And I decided I'm probably just going to add a whole bunch of bats. So I want to do some embossing on here because I'm going to do a resist technique with watercolor. I'm going to keep this card really simple and let these elements and these silhouettes really stand out and be the star of the show. Rather than using black embossing powder, I'm going to use clear embossing powder, but I still want the elements to be black. I've heard a lot of people suggest that they get better results when they use Versafine Onyx black ink and clear embossing powder versus using Versamark ink and black embossing powder. And since lately I've been feeling frustrated by the fact that little stray bits of black embossing powder are getting melted onto my card and not creating such a crisp image, I decided to give it a shot. And so far I really like it better. And I also think it's actually a little more economical because you can buy really large jars of clear embossing ink, whereas the colored embossing ink usually get in smaller jars that are more expensive. So I'm just going to tap on the Versafine ink. Versafine is a sticky ink, and so it will hold the embossing powder just like Versamark will hold the embossing powder. And so I'm going to stamp each element. But I don't want to wait too long, so every time I stamp something, I'm going to go over to my embossing powder and sprinkle it on. You see that I keep my embossing powder in a sandwich container with a spoon. This is something that, like many crafters, I picked up from Jennifer McGuire. It is a very helpful tip. It makes using embossing powder so much easier. I know everyone says, oh, you could just sprinkle it over a coffee filter and pour it back in, but honestly, those kind of methods deterred me from doing it very often, and now that it's just in this container and as soon as I tilt it over, it's put away, I use my embossing a lot more. And so I actually have a little drawer in my craft room dedicated to some embossing containers like that with some of my favorite colors. And you see here I am trying to get this all done quickly, and so that the embossing step happens all at one time, and I don't want to have to keep stopping to clean the stamps. And so there I was even able to put 2 stamps on the same block just by turning it over. So if you don't have a lot of blocks, that's one way you can have use more stamps at one time. So I knew I wanted to add a couple of bats to the scene, and I was thinking about how they might look. I think it's generally a good idea to have some of them coming off the scene, and so I stamped that one there on the left hand side. And then as time goes on, I'm like, am I getting a little too much? Am I stamping too many bats on? But then I got a certain point I was like committed to having lots of bats. So I might have done a little more planning in that sense, and that was where the scratch paper might have been a slightly better idea than using the stamps for placement. You see that I counted them there because I wanted to make sure I have an odd number. I'm a big fan of just using odd numbers. It tends to look better to me. And I think that a lot of people would agree with that kind of rule of odds. So I've got all of my clear embossing powder on now, and I'm going to hit it with the heat gun. You see there, I decide to leave my heat gun off to the side and let it warm up before I bring it over to the embossing powder. I've heard a lot of people suggest that that would provide less warping, and so I'm trying to give it a try and see if I notice a difference. I am stamping on 140-pound Strathmore watercolor paper because I am going to be using watercoloring to create this embossed background. And so I'm just going to make sure everything is dry and heated fully, and then we're going to move on to adding the color to this scene. For this card, I wanted to just use some really simple, cheap watercolors because I think that it's important to understand that you don't need fancy, expensive supplies or a lot of supplies to create really cool cards. And so I'm just trying to show how you can get a great effect with very little. So this is just a super cheap watercolor set that I had on hand, and it doesn't have every color. There's only, I think, 16 colors in it, and so you don't have a lot of options, but you know, you don't always need. You can do a lot of mixing and get some good options. So I want to make sure that the windows stay yellow. I think that that really draws attention to this really cool, detailed haunted house here. And so I'm just going to use the darker yellow to color it in to give a kind of a glow to the house. But when I go to create a wash over it, I'm going to need to have that area protected, so I'll show you how I can protect that area from the rest of the watercoloring in just a moment. When I do watercoloring, I don't keep the water in my water brush barrel. I think it releases too much water. I like more control, so I just spray on my craft sheet. So I'm just going to make sure all the little window areas are colored. It's a really quick coloring to do. And then I will add the way to resist it. So I'm going to want to put a cover of watercolor over the sky and create a nighttime sky effect. But I don't want it to muddy this yellow color. So what I'm going to do is take Glossy Accents and cover the yellow. Another and perhaps faster way to do the same thing would be to, while it was wet, put clear embossing powder over the yellow. You could do that with a Versa marker or Versamark ink marker. I'm not really quite sure what it's called, but basically it's a Versamark ink pad in marker form. So you could do that. You could use something like a distress marker, which will stay wet for a while, and fill those in. But I wanted to kind of show you like the easiest way that I thought would involve like the least fancy supplies, because a lot of people do have Glossy Accents and they're a really reasonable price. And so I'm just going to put Glossy Accents all over the windows. Then I will have to wait for it to dry. You see I'm taking a pin, and that's just to pop any air bubbles in the Glossy Accents. You have to make sure the Glossy Accents are fully dry. I don't suggest hitting them with a heat gun because it will kind of make it bubble up, and you don't really want that effect. You want it to be kind of a smooth glass. So after your Glossy Accents are dry, you can go in and add the rest of the detail to the image and the rest of the color to create the scene. Now, this green here is not like the perfect green. I would kind of want something darker, a little more of a forest green, but I just wanted to show you that you can create a really awesome card even if you have very limited amount of supplies. And you can make a green work for you, and you'll see that I kind of create this green to be a darker green in the end by adding some of the black. I really water down the black and color it over the green. So I'm going to add the grass just up to where the house would be. This adds to the effect that the tree is in front of the house. Because the tree is so much larger than the house, I want to make sure that it's clear that they're not actually sitting next to each other. And so by adding this foreground ending at the house, that becomes more apparent. I'm going to be filling in the sky now. I'm starting with a purple towards the bottom and make it darker as it goes. I could also use a blue towards the bottom, but I don't feel like there's a ton of space, and I want to make sure there's plenty of room to blend the colors out. And so I'm just starting, like I said, with the purple, doing a wash over it. I can color right over that yellow with no problem because I can wipe it away and it won't mix in or muddy that color at all because I added the Glossy Accents. And you see there that I sprayed the actual paper. I was getting it such that the concentration was a little too thick and it wasn't really doing much blending. And so with watercolor paper, if you're having trouble with blending, you can also just wet the paper directly so that the colors play a little bit more. And so I'm just going to keep layering in the black till I like it. You'll see eventually that I said before, I'll even put the black down on the grass because I want the grass to be a slightly darker color, because at night the grass won't really appear green. It would appear mostly black, but just to kind of give that hint of what it is, I want to leave the green in there. And like I said, just going to keep adding until I have it the way that I like it, and then hit it with the heat gun. What you'll notice though is because these are a cheaper watercolor, that there's kind of like a film left over all of that embossing. And so what I'm going to do is just take a wet rag and, a damp rag, like barely wet at all, and wipe off the black embossing areas. If you put too much water, you'll actually pull the color off, but I want just enough to wipe clean the embossed areas. So now I just want to layer up the rest of the card. I'm going to keep it really simple to focus on the scene that I spent so much time creating. I'm adding just a little bit of orange paper because it's a very traditional Halloween color and it will pop. There's no more orange, there's no other orange in the card, and so using that orange will make it really stand out. And then I do want to pull in that purple color, and so I'm just using a purple card base. I actually am a really big fan of using purple for Halloween. And I think that that's gotten more trendy recently to use some different colors and not always just use black and white. Anyway, that's it for my card today. I hope you enjoyed. You can check out newtonsnook.com to find out more about this release. And you can head over to my blog for a chance to win this stamp set. And I'll list some of the supplies in the description box below. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up and stay tuned for some more Halloween videos on my channel. Bye!